Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Coup Save America. As we discuss just about every week, America is a nation at odds with itself. In our news feeds, in our communities, and even around our dinner tables, we feel the strain of political polarization pulling people apart. Republicans and Democrats increasingly see each other not just as fellow humans with different ideas, but as enemies threatening the country's very future. The political process has become a bitter tug of war, where each side is focused more on defeating the other than on solving the real problems within our nation and within our society at large. Political polarization is a cancer on our country that undercuts governance, erodes social trust, and even fuels the specter of political violence, as we have seen throughout recent history. Now, in a healthy democracy, disagreement is normal. Hell, it's even productive. We expect debates on taxes, healthcare, or things like national security. What's different now is the depth of animosity that accompanies those very disagreements. Stereotypes and distrust have hardened. We've reached a point where partisans not only argue that the other side's policies are bad, they often conclude that the people who support those policies are also bad people. All of this is the emotional dimension of polarization. But there's also a deeper and more ideological dimension: how far apart our actual policy views and values are. Here, the picture has many nuances. On the one hand, Americans perceive a huge ideological gulf. The most politically engaged citizens think the other side holds extreme views far from their own, often underestimated areas of agreement. Research, for instance, has long pointed out that the median voter still holds mostly centrist or mixed positions, even if the activists on one side or the other are more extreme in their views. Interestingly, most Americans do not hold intense ideological views on every issue. Many simply pick and choose, and a significant chunk have a mix of left-leaning and right-leaning opinions. But because we have largely sorted ourselves into two partisan teams, even those with moderate or inconsistent beliefs get wrapped in a red or blue jersey. What is undeniable is that political elites are highly polarized and have benefited significantly from a highly polarized environment. In Congress, Republicans and Democrats vote in almost perfect opposition on major issues, with virtually no overlap. This elite polarization has been increasing for decades in a steady and rapid march. When politicians are so polarized, they set the tone for the country. They also shape voter perceptions. Many voters correctly sense that their elected leaders in the other party hold very extreme positions, and they then assume that all supporters of that party must hold those extreme views as well. Often that is a misperception, but it's still a powerful one. As a Carnegie Endowment analysis put it, Americans are less ideologically polarized than they think. But the most engaged people, the ones who are paying attention to politicians, have the biggest misperceptions about the other side's belief. We look at Congress, where compromise is rare and rhetoric is hated and heated, and imagine that half of our fellow citizens are utterly alien to us. Effective polarization, the mutual dislike between parties, has also been rising since at least the 1980s. Notably, it started before the advent of social media. Its growth actually correlates strong with changes in our media ecosystem, such as the rise of cable news and partisan talk radio in the 1980s and the 1990s. Older Americans who consume a lot of television and talk radio are actually more polarized in their attitudes on average than younger people who primarily use the internet. That's a critical point. It's not just Facebook or Twitter that is causing all of this, although online echo chambers do play a critical role. Rather, it's the preceding decades of ideologically siloed media consumption, be it conservative talk radio shows or liberal commentary networks, that have primed Americans to see politics as a tribal clash. Each side has been fed a steady diet of how terrible the other is. And as human psychology predicts, when we begin to see a group as the other, we readily inflate the worst about them and minimize any commonality. So polarization has these two reinforcing sides: ideological, which is differences in policy preferences, and affective, which are differences in feelings toward the other. In the United States today, the affective side, the raw dislike and trust, is especially pronounced. Americans might agree on more things than we realize, yet we are convinced that we are hopelessly divided on everything. This perception alone can, of course, be a self-fulfilling prophecy, breeding yet even more hatred and division. Part of why it's gotten worse each year is the feedback loop. Polarization begets polarization. Conflict draws attention, and as each side's extreme voices get amplified, moderate voices are often drowned out. Politicians have many incentives to play to their base in primary elections, and the base is more polarized, which leads to the election of more ideologically extreme officials, which in turn makes governing more polarizing and difficult. It's rather a vicious cycle. By now, we effectively have dueling narratives about basic events, alternative realities split along partisan lines. For example, climate change, once a scientific issue, is now sadly polarized. And even a public health crisis like COVID-19 became subject to red-blue narratives. Each year sees a new set of divisive storylines that deepen the wedge. Think of controversies like NFL anthem protest or school curriculums, topics that could have been niche but became national partisan litmus tests. Foreign adversaries have even seized on this. Russian online trolls have continually used social media to inflame polarization, posing them as Americans on both sides of contentious issues to pit us against each other. They recognize that a house divided is weaker. Polarization isn't just an academic concern or something that makes Thanksgiving dinners rather awkward. It actually has real consequences for our society and our ability to govern ourselves. In a recent Pew survey, for instance, a staggering 86% of Americans agreed that, quote, Republicans and Democrats are more focused on fighting each other than on solving problems, end quote. 86% held that perception. That is an overwhelming consensus that our leaders are too busy warring with each other than to get things done for we the people. What can we do when faced with such a staggering obstacle to progress? It often feels like a roadblock of this size is simply unmovable. If you're a regular consumer of this podcast, Coup Save America, you'll know that we've spoken many, many times about today's environment of political polarization. I've outlined the actions that need to be taken by our government, our media, and by us as individuals to help neutralize this destructive social division. And our show has hosted many knowledgeable guests to come on to discuss and dissect this very issue. We are in so deep at this point that brainstorming ideas on how to scramble our way out of the political polarization pit seems an almost hopeless endeavor. Even as this podcast tries its very best to maintain neutrality and hear from guests with widespread opinions, does Coup Save America ultimately add its voice to the echo chamber of political polarization? Are we part of the problem? Personally, I must acknowledge that in my own private life, I succumb to temptation and spread polarizing rhetoric far too readily, despite being aware of the damage it causes. Our culture of political polarization can be overwhelming and exhausting. And it is only one of the many setbacks to civil engagement that we'll be discussing in today's episode. With the deck stacked so heavily against us, it can be hard not to shrug off politics and stop caring about our government's actions altogether. And on that pessimistic note, this is the final word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. My guest today is here to talk about the importance of civil engagement and to encourage us not to give up the good fight. Carl Abel is the founder of Crayon Box Politics, a civic tech and media initiative committed to making political information accessible, transparent, and engaging for all citizens. And we'll be meeting Carl right after. Drawing on over 2 decades of service as a Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant, Carl Abel carries forward values of leadership, integrity, and public duty into his work at the intersection of civic engagement and media. Through Crayon Box Politics, Carl produces the weekly podcast Crayon Box Weekly, co-hosted with Avery, a transgender veteran, where they explore current events, political trends, and historical context in an accessible but elevated way. Beyond the podcast, he is spearheading the development of The Archivist, an AI-powered platform designed to serve as a comprehensive hub for government information, empowering citizens, researchers, and journalists to more easily access the records that shape our public life. Carl's vision for Crayon Box Politics is rooted in 4 core objectives: creating a centralized repository of government information, building fact-based profiles of political leaders, tracking the evolution of key issues, and fostering inclusive political discourse free from partisan distortion. His work blends grassroots innovation with a principled commitment to human rights, civic engagement, and democratic participation. Having recently transitioned from military service to entrepreneurship, Carl understands both the challenges and opportunities of bridging service to civic life. He has built Crayon Box Politics as a nonpartisan, independent platform to help citizens stay informed and engaged while encouraging critical thinking and active participation in democracy. Guided by the project's motto, stay informed, stay engaged, always color outside the lines, Carl continues to champion transparency, accessibility, and civic empowerment in an era where democracy absolutely depends on it the most. Carl, welcome to the program, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I want to start with a very simple question. When I hear someone say, I'm not political, what does that statement really reveal about our civic culture today?
It reveals a lack of understanding for how our civic culture impacts our day-to-day lives. I mean, we can have someone that says, I'm not political, but then they'll be able to rattle off the names of their favorite football team, but won't be able to tell us who their representative is. Those same people that say, I'm not political, will be the first people that say that they are not content with the way that things are occurring in the government, and will be the first ones to be disappointed in Congress for the shutdown, or disappointed in the president for the way that he does things, but they didn't use their voice to make that disappointment known when they had the chance.
And what are some ways that people can actually make their voice heard so that they have a chance? I think the biggest problem that we have today is people just feel as though the voting box is not a valid place for their voice to be heard.
Well, to be honest with you, that's a fair point. And in reality, depending on how high up you're voting, determines how lost in the volume your voice gets. But the biggest thing, and this is something that I tell everyone, is that politics is local. So when you're looking to make a change or make a difference in your civic environment, the first step is going to your town hall meetings. Getting involved with your parent-teacher conferences, going to the Board of Education meetings to find out what is being approved or what is not being approved to teach students in your local area, even if you don't have kids. But participating locally is what really drives the change that you're going to be able to see. I liken it to, so I was an intelligence Marine for 20 years, and the way that you could see it, depending on the level of the Marine Corps, or like what unit you were at, determined how well we are able to see how our intelligence analysis was being effectively utilized and making a difference. So at the infantry battalion level or even the infantry company level, our intel was, you could see the difference that was being made when we were telling the commanders, hey, this is what's going on, and they would make that decision. But the higher up you get, the less, the more diluted that effect became, and the less you were able to see it. And so as soon as you get up to the division level, you start to realize or start to think that what you're doing has no impact. Same thing applies to voting. The lower levels that you vote at, the more participation you put at your local levels, the more you're going to see that change. Whereas the higher up you go, the less you're going to actually see that change.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's a fair point. I think a lot of people might say, well, I just don't have the time to get that involved locally in politics, to go to the town hall meetings or to go to the student, the school committees and what have you. I think a lot of people just feel utterly hopeless in that sense.
So I've encountered that a couple times. A lot of my good friends that have gotten out of the Marine Corps, they're now working full-time jobs, and they're parents, and they've got a whole bunch of things going on. But the reality is, and the answer that I tell them is, make the time. Find out when these events are happening, because they don't happen all the time. My town council meets once a month, and they meet at 7 o'clock at night. So work is done. There's plenty of time to get there. It lasts an hour, and they keep it down to that hour. And all you have to do is listen. And you don't have to go to every single one to be participating. You just have to go to at least one or two, maybe one every other month. And what happens is you start to understand, hey, this is why these things are happening in my town. This is why the pothole isn't getting fixed. This is how I can participate. These are the things that I can do. But if you don't make the time, then you'll never have the time.
Yeah. How big of a problem would you say that political disengagement has become in these modern times?
So I'm going to jump up to the national level. In 2024, Donald Trump won with 44.5% of the registered voters who voted. Excuse me, correction, 44.5% of the voters, right? That means that Kamala Harris lost the popular vote by 2 million votes. And there were 22 million votes that were left on the table. 22 million voters just didn't go to the polls. Could have had a massive impact on the results of that election had every person who was a registered voter gone and voted at the polls. Bringing that down more locally, in this past election in 2025, literally last week, the Democrats won the gubernatorial election in Virginia, won with 51% of the vote share. So of the total votes that were made, 51%. But when you look at the turnout, which is still kind of fluctuating right now because they haven't confirmed everything, but currently the turnout was 25%, which means that the governor of Virginia won her seat with just 12.8% of registered voters in Virginia.
Wow.
So that's how bad it is. People aren't voting, people aren't participating, people aren't taking knowledge. And so as a result, we're getting these outcomes that are driving more voters away from the polling place because they feel that their vote isn't being heard, all because people aren't voting. It, like you said, it's that self-eating snake. It's just a constant loop where unless we do something to break out of it, unless we encourage voters to be participants in the way that their government operates, we're just going to continue down the road where fewer and fewer people will be making the decisions for the greater population.
And also, to be fair too, voting is made very hard for a certain class of people in this country. That's I don't know how much that plays into the disengagement that we're seeing, but it does seem as though there's one party in particular that seems to want to make voting more difficult for people to do.
Yeah, so I would caution us in going in that partisan route, right? But it's true. You're right. There does seem today to be one specific group of individuals who are more oriented on election security as a means of election suppression. So, ending mail-in voting, ending the early voting, ending drop box voting, ending curbside voting. All of these things that encourage predominantly Democratic leaning voters to go out and vote, those things are getting restricted depending on what state you're in. However, what I will say is that because of grassroots movements, like Get Out the Vote, I can't remember the organization that puts together carpools to take people from their home to the polling place and then back. Those movements are actually helping to kind of balance that suppression operation out and alleviate the issue, but it's not good enough. um, there are security concerns, which I will grant to anyone who brings it up, that there are concerns. However, if you look at our past elections and you look at the incidents that have occurred, because voter fraud occurs, it happens, but it doesn't happen at a rate that is substantial enough to warrant the kinds of draconian rules that we're trying to put into place. Our current president wants to eliminate everything but same day voting, and he wants to make it all on paper ballots. And I mean, that's great if we increase the number of polling places, we make voting day a national holiday and mandate that no one works on voting day, and ensure that everyone has the opportunity to go to vote. That'd be a great idea. But in practice, the reality is much different. That it just can't happen. So what
Right.
we have to do is we have to be able to think outside the box. How can we ensure that people can vote? How can we ensure that people can get to the polling places? And that's something that the Democrat Party seems to be more willing to do, where the Republican Party is more of the conservative, whoa, let's hold back. We don't want to go that far because what if the election gets stolen?
Yeah. Yeah. Valid points. Do you think that the political disengagement that we're seeing today is more a symptom of exhaustion, or is it something that's more deliberate as far as alienation is concerned?
Um, Entertainment. I like to attribute. We like to talk about 1984, the book by George Orwell, as an example of what could happen in an authoritarian regime here in the United States. But what we failed to think about is the short story A Brave New World, where the people have become so complacent because they're entertained that
Yeah.
they're not caring about the less entertaining aspects of how our government works. And so I would say that the voter apathy comes from the fact that politics just isn't entertaining. Politics is not fun in the sense of, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to drink a beer with my friends and watch the debate, because people don't do that. People drink beers and watch football games or soccer games or baseball games. And so as a result, the voter apathy comes in from the are you not entertained crowd. And I would say that that's the biggest driving factor. I mean, you bring up a valid fact about voter exhaustion. I mean, we have campaigns and elections, and our election cycles are, thanks to Donald Trump, the last presidential election cycle lasted 2.5 years because he jumped into it as soon as he got told that he was getting tried for mishandling classified information.
Right.
As a result, I would say that there is some exhaustion there. But I think that the biggest thing is just it's not entertaining, so people don't care.
Yeah. How much of it too is it seems as though that the major political parties, this is excluding local races, for instance. So, your president, your representatives, senators, and so forth. It just seems as though they're not exciting candidates that are running. They're not motivated, and they certainly do not seem to listen to the people. They seem more donor centric, more concerned with appeasing their donor base than the voter. And that has to play into the apathy equation on some level, does it not?
Yes and no, right? At some point, we, the voter, have to take responsibility. And we can point to how our representatives are all purchased by donors. But at the end of the day, we're the ones that voted for them. The reason that Nancy Pelosi has been in office for so long is because of the fact that her voter base, her
Yeah.
constituents voted for her every single time that she was up for election. And she was up for election every other year because that's how the representatives work. The reason that Joe Biden was in office for so long is the exact same reason. Joe from Scranton, everyone knew Joe from Scranton. And so they voted for him because they knew him. And it was really hard to bust through that because of the party system.
Yes.
And so I'll give that to you, right? Like I've looked into running here in North Carolina, and the two party system holds a death grip on the state election board here. I mean, there's 50% on either side. They sit on that board, and you have to get their permission to run if you're not going to run on the party ticket. And if you are going to run on the party ticket, you got to raise money for other
Yep.
campaigns in order to get full support from the party ticket. So I would say that, yeah, you're right. There's some donor issues, there's some candidate issues, but at the same time, the blame still comes back to us, the voter, because the founders created our nation with the ideal that the power belonged to the people, not to the government, not to the representatives.
Well, to be fair on that point, though, our founders were very specific in who they determined were eligible to vote. So I would argue that their intent was more focused on giving power to the elite members of our society rather than to the common person.
Um, yes and no. So if you look at the debates that go around and you actually kind of evaluate some of the words that are spoken, especially in the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, that's one of the things that I've been digging into really hard the last couple of months. But if you really look at the wording, right, you can tell that especially some of the more learned individuals like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, our first president, they understood that the vote wasn't going to be maintained at the elite level. They understood that eventually there would come a day where everyone would have the ability to vote. But they also knew that in order to get the Constitution up and running, because prior to the Constitution, we existed under the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And I mean, our Constitution isn't great, but the Articles of Confederation were a mess. But they knew that in order to get the Constitution to where it was and to get it ratified, they had to make some concessions, right? And I am not forgiving the terrible actions by some of our founding fathers, and I'm not forgiving the way that they did things back then. But what I'm saying is that if you look at it from the lens of they understood that it was going to grow, which is why they had the amendment process established, um, you start to realize that they didn't want it to be held at the elite level. They wanted it to go down to the people. They wanted the people to have the power because they understood what happens when a government consolidates power at its core.
Yeah, which we're seeing now play out
Mhm.
to a large
Um,
degree.
I would argue that we're also seeing the system flex its muscles a little bit because despite the fact that we're seeing the federal government consolidate power around one singular executive, we're also seeing the states respond in a way that is categorically part of the intent. Gavin Newsom and the way that he is leading the state of California, Governor Hochul and the way that she is leading the state of New York. Governor Pritzker, and the way that he's leading the state of Illinois, those individuals are guiding the states in their response to a federal government that is overstepping its bounds. Those states are actually doing what they need to do in order to ensure that we maintain the form of government that we have, which is exactly why the Constitution was written the way that it was. So it balanced those powers, and it ensured that we had that capability.
In your view, how do you define the civic cost of non-participation?
Bear with me, my headphones went out.
Oh, no problem.
So your question of how do we determine the cost of civic non-participation? Well, look around you. The polarization that we have is a result of non-participation. The rise of the political parties is the result of civic non-participation. The fact that we have a political party stranglehold on our system is a result of non-participation. And the only way to get that back is for people to be more engaged in the way that their government works at the local level, the state level, and at the national level.
Yeah. Well, what distinguishes a healthy political skepticism from total disengagement, do you think?
I, Engagement. I mean, it's okay to be skeptical. It's perfectly fine to be skeptical. I would encourage voters to be skeptical. But at the same time, if you're not participating in the way that your government works, and you finally, hey, one day you go out and you vote and things just didn't go the way that you voted, and you say that's proof of why my vote doesn't count. Well, that's not true. You're just using that to correlate your findings and reinforce your belief that your vote doesn't count. When in reality is, if you go out and you vote every single time there's an election, every single time there's an opportunity for you to vote, what you'll start to see is that sometimes the people don't agree with you. Sometimes people do agree with you. And if you start to understand that and start to become more informed, then you'll be able to inform your vote a little bit more.
Yeah. How does political abstention differ from, say, conscious resistance or acts of, for instance, civic protest?
Civic protest is getting involved in the civic process. Protest is written into our Constitution. It is the lifeblood that is America, right? But civic protest is useless if we don't actually reinforce that with our vote. Because
Right.
you can protest all day long, but if you don't stand your ground and go vote the way that you protest, nothing's going to change.
Well, to be fair, a lot of times I feel as though I'm not able to vote the way I protest because there's nobody on either side who seems to fit the bill in terms of, where I stand on a lot of the issues or just humanity in general. Um, and I think a lot of people that tune into the show had that same kind of feeling, that same mentality, like, um, yeah, I protest. I'm engaged civically. I'm engaged locally in politics. But it just seems as though we go back to that donor centric hold and the two party system hold, which I consider to be a huge stain on this country right now. Because we really don't. I mean, I like to say we have the illusion of choice, right?
Yeah,
With the party system.
I would agree with you. I mean, we did. Uh, I did an episode looking at the electoral college and how the electoral college has because everyone points to, oh well, the electoral college, we don't actually elect the president. They're right. And it's an indication of how our vote doesn't matter. Um, But what I'll say is this, right? And it's kind of twofold. The first thing is my initial response to everyone who says there's no one on the ballot that aligns with my ideals. Okay, why didn't you run? Um, and then the next thing that I say, because I already understand that there are barriers to running, because I myself have considered it, explored it, and I still haven't run yet. But the next thing that I say is, who is the person that best aligns with your ideals? Vote for them. And then if they get up into office and that you give them a chance and they don't do what you wanted them to do, vote for someone else next time. Or use the time in between their election win and their next election to prepare yourself to run against them.
Yeah. That is, as you say, though, that is a very hard, difficult path to go down. And for a lot of people, I mean, if you don't have the name recognition, if you don't have the money to at least get started, I mean, again, local politics is different, but we're seeing in local politics too a great deal of money flowing in from outside interest, even at the local level. And that, I think, is making that barrier, that hardship, even greater for the average person to consider something like running for office.
Yeah, I mean the New York City gubernatorial race was in the millions of dollars
Yeah,
campaign wise. So it, a lot of what I say is easier said than done, right? But the important thing is we have to try, we have to keep trying, and we have to keep working, and we have to keep moving through the process. Because if we just throw up our hands and say, "Oh, well,
right.
game's over," we've already lost.
Yeah. So when people, and I say this quite frequently, so I take blame for this as well. But when people say, look, both sides are just corrupt, is that a form of disengagement or oversimplifying?
it's it's almost an oversimplification, because you're right. I mean, both sides are corrupt. Um, it, it- they all take money from all kinds of different donors. There's organizations out there that track all the money. There's organizations out there that track how much or where our representatives have put their money in as far as stocks goes,
Mhm.
and allows you to like copy that and then put your money in those same stocks. Um, but at the end of the day, not every one of those individuals is as corrupt as we think, right? Jasmine Crockett, um, she has a net worth of roughly $20,000. That's it. And she's one of the loudest voices in Congress on the Democratic side right now. Um, and I only know her because I've been digging into her because I'm in the process of building politician baseball cards so that we can get those
Oh,
out there and help voters see and understand, hey, this is what my politician is, and how she stands as far as her voting record and her income rate and how much she had when she first got into office and how much she has now. Mike Johnson started out with in the negatives as far as his net worth went, and how he's worth over $1 million.
yeah.
Nancy Pelosi, she's retiring with
Oh,
a net worth of $219 million.
yeah.
So it all depends. It depends on which candidate or which politician that we're talking about when we talk to, and that's where that oversimplification comes in. Is which
Yeah.
politicians are actually corrupt and which ones are actually fighting for the people.
I know this is a big source or a big motivating factor for you and for your organization that you've created. But I want to ask you, if can political neutrality truly exist in a society that's governed by policies which are such as they are?
No, and so that's one of the things that we struggle with at Crayon Box Politics, is that we take a hard line stance on any policies that are written in such a way or enacted in such a way that they infringe upon the human rights of any individual, regardless of nationality, regardless of citizenship. Um, And so sometimes it comes across that we're being partisan in nature because we stand against the way that ICE is conducting their operations in
Right.
deporting the millions of individuals who are here undocumented. Um, we stand against the phrase illegal immigrants because that is not a legal term. The legal term is undocumented immigrants because the only time that it is illegal to be in the United States without documentation, but coming across at a place and time and location that is not allowed or not authorized by the government, that act is illegal. But once you're in here, if you can't be found guilty of that act, you're not here illegally. You're here just undocumented, and now you need to change that. And so there's a proper way of doing that, and the
Right.
government just isn't doing that the proper way.
Right. And again, this is one of those things where I think people look at and they just like, I mean, I obviously have to follow the news closely every single day. And I can't tell you how depressing and exhausting a task that is to just follow with. I mean, we're overwhelmed with I don't even want to say it's news anymore. I mean, it's certainly newsworthy. It's news in the sense that it's news, but it's just so emotionally draining that you feel like you're always fighting and struggling to survive. Um, Given the vast majority of things that we're being presented with every single day, and then don't even get started with social media. I mean, that's a whole other beast altogether. I'm talking about just consuming the average, the news.
Mhm.
Um, and it does kind of make you want to just kind of disengage at a certain point.
And so that's where you have to. So I feel like I'm on a deployment again, where it's you wake up, you do your job, you
Yeah,
go to sleep, you wake up, you do your job, go to sleep. There's no break. Um, but what I learned on deployment is that you also have to, in addition to making time for your job, but you have to make time for yourself, right? So what I do is I will make sure that there's a certain time of the day where I break contact, and I'll go to the gym. I'll turn a movie on, and that helps keep me going. But you're right; it's disheartening when you turn on the TV and it's just wham bam, thank you, ma'am, constant bad
yeah.
news. There's never really a positive story that comes out, and I think that's just the nature of the news, um, because you know bad things sell, bad news stories sell,
Yeah.
bad news stories get people to tune in, which then in turn drives more polarization. But at the end of the day, you got to look for those good news stories.
They're getting harder and harder to find.
They
Admittedly.
they are they are. I mean, so I didn't correct you earlier, but we had a change in co-hosts because Avery had to step back to handle personal issues that are related to what's going on with this administration when it comes to the laws and the executive orders as they apply to trans Americans. And I mean, he lives in a state that is very deeply Republican, very deeply red, and so he's having to fight his way through that process. Um, his treatment isn't being provided by the VA anymore. So he's having to fight through that process as well. So he took a step back. But long story short, my co-host now is Vanessa, and she's a Navy veteran, works in the healthcare industry now, and she found a story about I really hate to say it, about butt breathing, right? And we ran with that on Monday, yesterday when we did our story, and we did that because it was the most hilarious story that was out there, and it allowed for us to kind of take a breath and laugh about something. And we figured put that on the show and allow our listeners to breathe and listen, no pun intended, breathing, and listen to the story so that they could disengage from the drama that is day-to-day politics news and actually focus on something that was funny if not inspiring.
Interesting. I'll have to check that episode out. That was yesterday, you said?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. I also wanted to ask and get your perspective on this. Has there ever been a time in American history where mass disengagement has been at the levels that it is today, or in such a way that it actually reshaped what we consider to be our democracy?
That's a good question. That's a question that I have not researched into. I've been so focused on the how and the why for the way our system works that I haven't looked into that statistic.
Okay. Do you see any parallels between today's civic apathy and, I don't know, like the political climate of maybe the Gilded Age? Because some people would argue that we're entering a time that's even more extreme than what we saw in the Gilded Age.
I I wouldn't say that. Um, and the reason that I wouldn't say that is because of the amount of information that we have available to us today. I would say that the issues around voter non-participation and civic disengagement are similar, and the trends are similar, but I wouldn't say that we've gotten to that point. I would say that what we're seeing is a tendency for people to just want to focus on other things because, oh, there goes my camera. Give me a second.
Sure. We're getting,
I'm just having nothing but technical difficulties all day long. um, Here, let's just do this. I'll put you right there, and that should work.
yep, that works perfectly.
All right. So,
You
I am just having nothing but technical difficulties. I apologize. So back to what I was saying, I would say that what we're seeing is we're at a precipice. Um, we can slip into the voter disengagement that we've seen in the past, and we can see that slippage fall into irreparable damage that creates a severe polarization that results in a civil war or a break apart of the union. Or we can see a situation where the American people take hold of the information that's available to them and start to learn how to hold our representatives accountable and make them do their jobs. I think I answered that question. If I didn't, I apologize.
No, that's fair. I think that again goes back to the issue of, you mentioned accountability. It seems as though once you become an incumbent, you're just guaranteed to stay in office. I mean, you've got the voter recognition, that kind of develops. I mean, granted,
Mhm.
maybe not after the first cycle or so, but people know who you are, they know your name, and then you run into that obstacle again of, it's more difficult for newer candidates to kind of jump into the fold. And to me, again, that seems like that is a huge consequence, and I suppose a cause too of disengagement. And it just seems like it's almost insurmountable at this point.
When I'll put it like this, and I do this a lot because of my military background. When we looked at Normandy Beach and we saw how fortified it was, we didn't say, "Oh, well, there's the game." We didn't say, "Oh, it's too much. It's going to be too hard for us to get up that hill. It's going to be too much for us to establish a beachhead. We just don't have that capability." Um, Instead, what we did is we attacked, and we didn't accept that. Oh, it's too hard for us to do it. Um, and as a result, we wound up taking Normandy Beach and then proceeding further to defeat the fascist Nazi regime. Same thing with Japan. Japan came across the Pacific Ocean, attacked Pearl Harbor, at that point, we could have said, no, it's too hard. We're not going to be able to build the ships that we need in time to counter Japan. Instead, what we did is we got together, we banded together, we held arms in lock, and we built the ships, and we went back and we pushed Japan all the way back to their island, and we won. Right now, our final act of winning that part of the war was questionable, and made us the only country in the world who's ever used a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
But we did those things because we banded together and we held together. It's difficult, yes, absolutely. It's going to be hard. It's going to be an uphill battle every single day. I haven't given up on my dream to run for office, and I've had a dream to run for office since I was a little kid. My dream has changed. When I was a kid, I wanted to be president. Now that I know what the true presidency means, I don't
Yeah.
want to be president. But my dream is still there, and I haven't given up on it, right? But that's also why I created Crayon Box Politics, because Crayon Box Politics is part of that dream. Because I recognize that it's not just about voting. It's not just about running for office. It's not just about doing the things that we've talked about. It's about making sure that my peers, my fellow citizens, know what's going on. It's about making sure that my fellow citizens are informed, right? So that whole stay informed, stay engaged, right? If you're not informed, it's going to be hard for you to be engaged. If you're not engaged, it's going to be hard for you to be informed. And so what Crayon Box Politics mission at its core is to help voters find a way to be informed and engaged at the same time. And then as we do that, and as we lock arms and we hold firm against the corporate purchasing of our politicians, what will happen is that those barriers become less and less of a barrier and more of a speed bump. And at that point, once they hit speed bump stage, we've won.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, how has the decline of civic education in schools contributed to this climate of political disengagement? Because you can almost trace a parallel there.
Yes. I grew up in California, and I would say that I had one of the better civic educations among those individuals that I was in the Marine Corps with, and even those of my friends today. And I say that I'm long-winded about this one, and I apologize, but
Hmm.
today, in today's day and age, we don't teach kids civics because we don't teach kids how to think. We teach kids what to think. We don't teach kids how to think critically about their environment. We teach kids what to think about their environment. And depending on where you went to school, you're going to be taught a different what to think than someone else who's taught in a different location.
Yep.
Our teachers also teach, and this is no fault on them, but our teachers also teach to a test, right?
Yep.
They are taught, they teach kids what the test answers are rather than teaching the kids how to actually functionally use the knowledge. So when kids graduate from high school, they graduate from high school with zero understanding of how the world really actually works. They just know what the test answers were, and they probably dumped all of that by the time they walked across the stage and picked up their diploma.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I would say that it's an immense effect. It's an immense effect because it takes away the importance that we should be ingraining in every single child that is going to school. Because every single child should learn that your number one duty as an American is to participate in your government, period.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And I see the erosion of civic engagement, civic education, as also a direct consequence that was intentional. I mean, it seems as though there's a saying, and I'm going to mutilate it, I'm sure, but something along the lines of, we love the uneducated as far as a political motif, because the more uneducated people are, the easier they are to manipulate and control.
And that's accurate. I I don't disagree with you at all. That you're you didn't murder it, you hit it on the dot. But what I'll add to it is that, our current president very clearly and proudly proclaimed that smart people don't like him. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. And I'm not saying that Americans are stupid. I'm just saying that Americans' willingness to allow the representatives to do whatever they want and continue voting for them,
Yeah.
um, and drop off the radar as far as making sure that they hold those representatives accountable is what's gotten us to this point. So Americans aren't stupid. Americans aren't lazy. Americans just don't they don't care. And they don't care because they've been allowed to not care.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of those things. Like, if you look at the No Kings protest, both 1.0 and 2.0, 2.0 kind of got buried in the news cycle, but it was even larger than 1.0. And both of those protests, they drew such a large crowd that it gives me hope that we're actually doing something right now. And the system is working in a way. But we could do more. We could
Yeah.
1,000% do more, and it starts at the education side.
Now, you didn't mention this specifically earlier, but you did talk about kind of, having a national day for voting, making it so that people cannot work on voting day. On a similar note, what do you think of compulsory voting that's practiced in some democracies? Would that work in the United States?
Does it work for compulsory testing when we have students go to take their standardized tests?
Right. No.
And it doesn't, because kids, they do it because they have to. They don't do it because they want to or they're interested in the topic. Same thing would apply to compulsory voting. If we have people just go in and vote, they're just going to go in and see their way out of it. I mean, that's the honest to God answer that I have to that. I don't think it should be compulsory, but I think it should be highly encouraged. And I think that we should adjust our culture so that when someone doesn't vote, that person feels a sense of civic shame because they didn't participate. They didn't do their duty. And so it should be very clear to them that, hey, oh, my bad, I feel bad, I'm going to vote next year.
Yeah.
But compulsory, I don't think I think that's the wrong direction.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you on that. I'm not a big fan of anything that's compulsory. As far as, the government is concerned, especially. Um, I wanted to ask also, how did the neoliberal era that we're still living in sort of redefine the notion of citizenship into more of a consumer identity?
Now, that's a deep question. Um, Capitalism is capitalism, right? I don't I don't think I have an answer for that question. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to blow hot air up your shorts and say, oh, this and that. What I will say is that I don't have an answer. But I'll also add that I think that the neoliberal movement as a whole has resulted in um, the type of consumerism that is polarized, right? Like,
Oh,
we've
absolutely.
allowed we've allowed these things to seep into it, where people are now boycotting um, beer brands because they used a trans icon as a, a, a speaker, like their figurehead.
Yep.
Where we've got people that are boycotting Target because they have pride displays up and they're selling pride merchandise. Um, so I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily that neoliberalism has shaped consumerism so much as consumerism is taking advantage of the polarization, and sometimes they overstep, which causes people to react in a way that creates more polarization, which
Right.
creates more money revenue aspects. So I would say that capitalism is capitalism, and it's going to take advantage of those things, and we just have to be aware of it. But again, going back to a brave new world, if the people are entertained, they'll be completely careless as far as what the government is doing.
Absolutely. Do you think that there are any lessons from, say, the civil rights era or the labor movements that can help us in overcoming disengagement?
I think we're already seeing those lessons being learned. And I say that again because, and I told Avery this. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit as I answer this question. I apologize. But
Oh,
earlier
no.
this year, Avery and I were talking, and we were going over the way that the current regime is pushing all of these authoritarian actions. And I told Avery, because I had just heard about Operation Uranus, which happened during World War II, where the Russians were able to surround the Germans, and literally stop the German invasion of Russia in its tracks. And the reason that they were able to do that is because Germany overextended itself. Um, and I take that and I liken it back to what this regime is doing. Um, this regime moves so fast and so hard that it's almost a blitzkrieg of a political movement that resulted in the utter destruction of a lot of the things that the organizations that we have held as truly American. USAID was the first to go. Um, but what we're seeing is that the people are starting to wake up. They're starting to realize, oh, this is what you meant when you said that you were going to make America great again. And we don't like the greatness that you think that America needs to be, because we were already greater than this. And so the people are starting to realize, hey, in the civil rights movement, how did we get the government to pay attention? We walked in the streets. When the government, when local governments didn't want to uh, integrate students into schools, so we had black and white schools as an integration process. What happened? Well, the people stepped up and made their voices heard, and the federal government stepped in and protected those rights. The only difference between now and then is that it's the federal government that's the antagonizer, and it is the state governments who are having to step up and protect the rights of the people. So I would say that the lessons that we can learn from those eras, we're already learning and we're already putting them into practice. And that is, make yourself seen, make yourself heard, be peaceful about it, and everything that we need will fall into place. But the other aspect is, you can protest all you want, you can be seen all you want, but if you don't go vote, if you don't participate in your elections, if you don't participate in your local government, if you say that I don't have time because I work two jobs, then nothing else will come of those actions.
Yeah. I'm curious. How has the meaning of public service changed since your time in the Marine Corps compared to now?
So I can only talk to my experience in the Corps, and it's ironic that this is Veterans Day, and I'm about to say what I'm about to say. But what I saw was a change in the Marine Corps, and I think that that is reflective of the changes that happened in the civilian sector, and that is that um, civil service is no longer about service; it's about taking care of yourself and putting yourself first. I saw it with a lot of the officers. I saw it with a lot of my peers, where the actions that were taken in a manner to ensure that they made it to the next rank. They were risk adverse when it came down to, will this get me promoted or not? The common turn of phrase was, do only that which your career can handle, rather than do what is good for the institution. Um, and so at the end of the day, I would say that the bottom line up front is I think that civil service over the last 20 years has turned into something that is more akin to a career where they care only about how they're going to get to the next rank, how they're going to get the next paycheck, how they're going to get the next promotion, rather than how they're going to ensure that the institution continues on after they've they've retired.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, yeah, I can certainly see that. I mean, it is, again, we're in a very individualistic society where everyone does seem like they're out for themselves. We certainly see that in the political sphere, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of something similar to that, what role does gerrymandering play in just convincing people that their votes just don't matter?
I hate gerrymandering with a passion.
Yeah, me too.
But in that same note, right, I fully support what Proposition 50 was and it is going to do in California. And I have these conversations with a lot of my old friends from California. I live in North Carolina now, so California politics just isn't something that I'm too terribly concerned about at the moment because it doesn't affect me.
Right.
Which is another point that we talk about when it comes to politics is the doesn't affect me measure. But when it comes to, I'm sorry, I forgot your question as I was rambling. What was the question
Oh,
again?
no, I was just asking, what role does gerrymandering play
Gerrymandering.
in their votes don't matter?
It plays a huge part, right? And it plays a huge part because what we're doing is we're boxing people into these spots, right? California is a huge example, and I go back to this state because it's a microcosm of what the United States is. California is a state that is predominantly Democrat, and it's predominantly Democrat because of the predominant population centers in that state.
Right.
And the Republicans in that state feel that their voice just isn't heard because no matter how they vote, they will never get enough of a vote to be heard in the assembly. They will never get enough of a vote to actually have a large enough representative to representatives at the congressional level to actually have a say. And so there's been a lot of push to move California and have that split into two, so you can have a conservative state and a progressive state. But gerrymandering as a whole, and both sides do it terribly.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And that's the thing. But what we've seen in today's day and age is that um, despite the calls for the end to gerrymandering, the individuals who have to make those changes are in office, and
Yep.
they're not gonna write themselves out of a district. They're not going to make it easier for them to lose the next election. And so, what I would say is that the difference between Texas and California is that California gave the decision to the voters. Texas didn't give the voters a chance to decide. And I think that it's important for us moving forward is what we have to do is we have to demand that kind of action as voters from all of our representatives. They're not going to vote themselves out of power. So what we need to do is we need to start petitions in every single state to get a motion on the ballot that says we are removing the gerrymandering process or even the redistricting process from career politicians, and we're going to give it to a bipartisan or even better, a nonpartisan group of individuals who's going to draw these lines in a manner that is fair and that is not considerate of Republican or Democrat or whatever political party that exists.
Right. Even those ballot initiatives, though, can be very difficult to get through, even when a majority of people do vote in favor of them. We have seen states say, yeah, we heard you, but we're going to do something else anyhow.
Uh, I would counter that argument with Colorado Proposition MM. And that proposition was voted on this year. Had nothing to do with the politicians, but everything to do with taxes. And essentially, what Proposition MM did is it adjusted the tax deductions for Coloradans that are earning $300,000 a year or more. And they reduced that cap or that tax deduction from $12,000 to $1,000. And if a couple that is making 600,000, that got reduced from 18,000 to 2,000. And that was a proposition that was out there for Coloradans to vote on. Right now, typical reasoning would suggest that Coloradans would go out and they would vote on this measure, and they would vote with their pocketbook because they would think, no, I don't want to raise taxes. And the common argument is, if you raise taxes, then no one has the incentive to make more money, because the richer you get, the more you pay. Well, Colorado very clearly said, we want to raise taxes on these individuals because we want to make sure that we have that extra $95 million a year to feed kids in school. And it won with 60% of those that voted. Right now, I'll give it to you. As of today, only 41% of registered voters turned out for that vote, which means that 60% is roughly 24% of the actual people that were eligible to vote. But the very fact that passed is an indication that voters are starting to wake up, and they're starting to say, hey, you know what? This really doesn't affect me, because I don't make $300,000 a year.
Right.
And I know that I have a kid that's in school, and I can't afford to give my kid the money to go to school. So I want my kid to have free school lunches. They're compelled to go to school, so the government should pay for it anyways.
Right.
And so that happened. And so I would say that the counter to the argument of voters voting in a way that may seem counter to what they think is good for them, is being demonstrably altered in this avenue.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Um, how do we measure, let's say, the impact of disinformation on the opposite side, which is civic withdrawal?
The best way to counter disinformation is with an informed public. Um, and that's really the answer that I have for you. And it's the obstacle that we face in informing the public is really and honestly truly based off of the accessibility of the information that is out there.
Right. Right.
I mean, the information that I pulled up about the percentages, I had to go through about 8 or 9 different websites that are government specific websites in order to pull the numbers so that I could get the information to make the percentages and do all the work. And it's daunting when you think about it
Oh,
like that. And no average American is going to want to go down and actually do all of those things, which is, again, you mentioned the archivist when you introduced me. The archivist is something that we're working on. It is an AI tool that is going to be able to go out and do that action of finding the right websites and pulling the data from those websites. But the intent there is to make it accessible, so that rather than having an average American go and spend an hour looking for the information, that individual will be able to go directly to a one location and get the source data that they can use in order to make a fully informed decision when they do go to the polling place.
yeah, that seemed like a very ambitious project. I applaud you
Yep.
for doing that.
Yep. Every single day, it's one of those. Well, did not anticipate this moment. So
Yeah,
that's kind of how the day goes. It's been a learning experience, to say the least.
I can imagine. We kind of touched upon this earlier, but I want to ask it in a more specific question. Do you think that campaign finance reform could, meaningfully re-engage the public?
Yes. And I pause because my my vision for how we should finance campaigns is that it should be a government funded process.
Yeah.
Um, the downside is that when you say anything about government funded or government run or government, all you get is, oh, you're a communist, or oh, you're a socialist, or oh, look at how this is done. But the reality is that we have people that are spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in campaigns. Meanwhile, we have millions of people in the United States that are living on the streets. We have a fight over SNAP benefits because people are unable to actually work 40-hour work weeks and have enough money to both pay for their food, their medication, and the roof
Yeah.
over their head. And yet we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to run a campaign. It's sick. It's disgusting. And the way that in my eyes, it should be is that the government should say, hey, listen, you're going to run for office. Here's money to run for office. You cannot use any more than that. And if you do, you're in violation of campaign laws and campaign rules.
Yeah, no, I would go for that quickly. Quickly. I mean, it certainly beats what we have today.
The
Um,
question is, how do you pay for it? Right. And
right.
it's just one more tax, and people are very opposed to taxes. So I guess the next best thing would be to say that from here on out, no matter what, you must disclose every single donor publicly, and you must make it available. And you can't hide it behind PACs. You can't hide it behind
Yeah.
organizations. Like, that money needs to be disclosed, and you need to be very clear who is funding your campaign. And I think that's a decent middle ground for the time being.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's almost as if they ought to be wearing like NASCAR shirts with who they're who's sponsoring
All the different sponsors on them.
Exxon, Mobil, all of those.
Yeah.
We talked just a minute ago too about sort of the complexity of information gathering and how daunting that is. I mean, you went through it yourself, gathering the statistics that you mentioned earlier. And I'm wondering, how does the complexity of just bureaucracy itself deter people from seeking information or taking action?
Um, so again, tying this back to my Marine Corps side, um, when we were developing new methods for, like, new programs for conducting intelligence analysis, I would frequently go through, and if it took me more than 2 clicks, I looked at the developer and I told them very straight up, like, this is not going to be used. This is not going to be something that is going to be useful in the realm of intelligence gathering. And the same thing applies to the information, right? If it takes more than 10 minutes for an individual, an end user, to find the information, just to find the information, not to read it, not to analyze it, not to assess it. But if it takes more than 10 minutes just to find it, that person is going to give up. And you can attribute that to social media and the fact that we have an attention span of like 30 seconds now.
You're
But
being very generous on that 30 seconds.
right, it's probably more like 10 seconds. But if it takes that user 10 minutes to find that information, they're not gonna keep looking. 90% of the time, if that information isn't at the very first page of a search result on Google, they're not going to find that information, and they're not going to be willing to continue to search for it. So I would say that the lack of ability, the lack of ease for voters to find the information is, um, definitely one of those things that aids in the apathy and the disengagement.
Yeah. Well, on a similar note, how can civic tech tools like Crayon Box Politics overcome some of these structural, disincentives to kind of participate?
Um, Short answer if I were to do a Google search and I were to find, like, say, search for the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, it would be instant. I'd know
Right.
who it is right away. To that same extent, civic tech tools like Crayon Box Politics, um, by providing that information at the fingertips and in a process that is easy to understand, easy to engage with, it makes it more inviting for people to participate in the way that their government works. Um, but to that end, right? Like what I found is that there are other tools out there that are doing similar things to what I'm wanting to do, or what we're trying to develop with the archivist. And the problem with those tools is they're great, they're amazing tools, but they cost upwards of $1,000 a month
Oh,
for
yes.
one specific state,
Yes.
right? And people don't have that kind of money to just, hey, here you go, and this is how I'm going to participate. I'm just going to throw money everywhere. And so I would say that um, ensuring that not only is the information accessible, but it needs to be free, and it needs to be readily usable in a free fashion, that it is digestible by the population. And that's the hard part, right? It's how do you do this? How do you develop something like this, that is going to result in uh, zero money coming in, zero revenue, but is something that is used so significantly by the end user that it ensures that we have a high voter in a highly informed voter base in the United States.
Listening to you talk reminded me many years ago, one of the projects that I was trying to work on was creating a system where you could do petitions online and have those petitions automatically mailed to, members of your of Congress or the president or whomever. And one of the biggest obstacles that we came up against was the cost of getting that information. Just the contact information, the API they call it,
Mhm.
was so cost prohibitive that it was just beyond the scope of the project that we could handle. And type of information certainly seems like it should be free and easily accessible at the very, bare minimum.
Yeah. So, funny that you mentioned that because I was actually looking those APIs today. Um, there
Uh-oh.
are there's actually govinfo.gov is a website that is chock full of APIs, right? And if you go to congress.gov, they now have APIs. But the problem now is those APIs are um, not functionally usable. And what I mean
Right.
by that is, if you're trying to pull a bulk download for all of the legislation, you're limited to 2,500 pieces of legislation, and that 2,500 pieces of legislation, just in the 119th Congress alone, was a month and a half of congressional activity. So January to the middle of February.
Wow.
Um, and so when you're having to do bulk downloads, it puts a kibosh on that because you can't just pull an entire congressional level of data. Same thing for our Congress members. And then you have to go through and make sure that you're keeping that up to date
Yep.
because our Congress members change all the time. API calls are now free, especially because they're government run. But there's limits on that too, because
Yeah.
if I use a government API and I pull the government data API, I can't charge for the information that I'm providing that's utilizing that API.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, well, technically, you're not supposed to, but which is why I'm confused at how other companies are charging thousands of dollars. But that if you read the little subtext, it says you cannot use this information to raise money or to make money.
Interesting. I mean, that makes sense on one level, but like you said, there are certainly companies out there that are charging a great deal of money for that data. Um, so that is curious.
I'm sure they've got a team of lawyers. It's like, oh, here's a loophole.
Or they just went out and bought the politician and said, "Hey, we'll get this." We'll get to
Yeah.
that.
Like, hey, what's that shiny object over there? Don't look at us.
So, I want to ask you kind of, what do you think it means to be a citizen in a democracy, and beyond just voting?
You're full of deep questions tonight. Um, for for me, so there was a time when I used to believe that we shouldn't have citizens who should be able to vote unless they served their country in some way, shape, or form. I still kind of think that it's important that our citizens do some type of service. But again, that compulsory thing comes into play, and I just don't agree with it. So, in short, what I would say is that to be a citizen in the United States, we have to accept the fact that we are part of a greater, larger community. The selfish, oh, that doesn't impact me mentality doesn't or cannot be entertained. Um, to be a citizen means that we have to understand that not only is our vote going to impact us, but our vote's going to impact others.
Right.
Our vote is going to have a direct impact on the livelihoods of people around us. And while it may not impact a cisgender white male who happens to be gay, that, hey, we're going to have rules in place that are going to limit the ability for people to get to the polling place. That doesn't impact me because I have a car and I can get to the polling place. But I'm going to vote because I want these people to be able to vote. Um, Transgender rights don't impact me, but I'm going to vote in a manner that ensures that my transgender citizens, my fellow transgender citizens, my fellow transgender Americans have the ability to pursue life and liberty and happiness and have that ability to live their life as their true authentic selves. But in that same sense, I'm also going to vote in a manner that ensures that someone who is deeply Christian is not forced to do things that are against their Christian values. So
Right.
I guess for me the answer to what does it mean to be a citizen in the United States is a complex answer because, or I guess the simplified version would be just looking out for each other. Like if you're a citizen, you're part of a community, man. Like
Yeah.
stop being this self-serving, self-centered individual. And I'm not calling you that. I'm just saying this in general. But like realize that your actions have consequences
Yeah.
and they affect people around you and take ownership of it.
Well, doesn't democracy require some sort of emotional investment just to survive?
Yes. Um, and looking out for one another is where that emotional investment should be made. Um,
Yeah.
I don't. I'm not saying that you should be completely selfless and not think about yourself because there's going to come a time where you're going to vote and be like, you know what? I don't want this person in office because I fundamentally believe that they're going to hurt my ability to do X, Y, or Z. But at the same time, I understand that the person that I am going to vote for is going to hurt the other person's ability to do X, Y, or Z. Um, the emotion comes in there. Like, where do you make that decision? And you don't always have to be self-sacrificing, but at least recognizing the impact that your vote has on other people is going to give you a pause to
Yeah.
say, you know what, maybe this isn't the right decision. Maybe I need to vote this way, even if it's against me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was Plato that said something along the lines of those who refuse to engage in politics are destined to be ruled by their inferiors. And
Hmm.
I probably mangled that quote a bit, but I think that holds true. And I think that this individualistic mindset seems to me to be mostly an American thing. Very individualistic and our rights, our liberties, and we're not as focused on the community, on the togetherness that you see in other nations. Isn't that kind of doesn't that go to the root of America, though? I mean, that problem. I mean, that's kind of where this nation started, was this individualistic. How do we kind of break free from that and move towards a more? Because I mean, to me, it just makes sense. We're a community. We need to be focused on community values, the cohesion of community, the good of society over the individual. Um, but how do we kind of get there? Because I mean, the argument that you'll hear from a lot of people is, well, no, that's what makes America so great, is that we can be individualistic and we should be.
So you mentioned how we started. We we started as a confederation of individual states with the ideal that that each state was its own individual nation and had its own individual sovereignty. But we came together for the sake of a unified front in order to defeat a common enemy. What we as Americans have to understand is that our strength lies in our unity. Our strength lies in our commonality. And that the only way for us to move forward as a nation is to understand that the individuality that we each have is supremely important, but only as it fits into the overall community. Because it's okay for us to be different. It's okay for us to think differently. It's perfectly fine for us to have disagreeing points of view. But if we don't talk about them, if we don't engage in civic discourse, which is a key tenet of the way that our representative democracy works, um, then we will never grow as a nation, and we will fall apart every single time. I would say that our culture is not necessarily individualistic at its foundation, but that it has grown individualistic because of certain aspects of the way that our society functions. Capitalism being one of them.
Right. A big
And I'm not a socialist whatsoever. Like, I love capitalism, right? But I also recognize that capitalism has its faults. It's not a good system in its raw form. And I think that what we have to get past is that tendency or that hesitation that came out of the Cold War that told us that socialism, communism bad, capitalism good, and we have to be willing to accept the fact that a socialist capitalist mentality where we are running an economy that is both governed by capitalist tendencies of supply and demand, but is also structured in a way that is regulated by the people and by the government. Um, I think that that is the answer to kind of helping resolve that. So, to your point, I don't think we need to change our culture to be more socially minded. I just think that um, we need to be more thoughtful, and I think that that's the answer. I really do.
what what does freedom mean in a society where most people now abstain from influencing its direction?
About a year ago, I was stopped at a stoplight, and it was the middle of the night, and there were no traffic. There was no one coming from the right or the left, but I was stopped at a stoplight, and the light was red. And I thought to myself, I could go right now, and nobody would know. And I thought to myself, that's freedom. But the reality is that that's not freedom, right? Freedom is the ability to self direct and the ability to make decisions, but it's also the ability to understand the impact that decisions have on one another. We talk about the freedom of speech, and yet we make it illegal to go into a movie theater and yell fire. Um, because again, speech has consequences, but freedom has consequences too. And so, in an environment where the people are becoming more and more disengaged, and they're giving up more and more of those freedoms, um, we're developing this mentality that As long as the government takes care of it, I'm free to do whatever I want until the government stops you from doing whatever you want. So freedom has consequences. You're free to disengage. But at the end of the day, that disengagement is going to cost you freedoms. So you have to be participating. You have to be part of the process in order to keep the freedoms that we love here in the United States, like the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of religion.
Well, can a disengaged majority even still be considered sovereign?
It depends. It's subjective, right? That disengaged majority considers themselves sovereign, but from the outsider perspective, that disengaged majority is not sovereign because they're governed by rules that they just don't see.
Right.
It's like Pinocchio and the strings, right? Like a puppet has strings. It's told what to do. It's guided by the puppeteer, and then that puppet doesn't know any different. And it's the same thing that applies to a disengaged population. Once the population ceases to be the puppet and becomes the puppet master, um, what happens is they realize that they have freedom, but the freedom has limits. I wouldn't say limits. That freedom has requirements that go along with it.
Right.
And so, yes and no. It's subjective.
Well, okay. How does disengagement then distort the meaning of consent in consent of the governed?
Hmm. In today's day and age, silence is consent. Um, and I say that because when people don't engage, they're giving their consent to their representatives to do the things that their representatives are doing. When when the voters are not going to their town halls, they're giving their city council the consent to spend the money the way that the city council wants to spend it. They're giving consent to the school boards, in order to allow them to teach the children what they want to teach. Um, when you disengage, you're giving up your ability to consent because you're just consenting. Um, and so, as a result, I would say that again, in today's day and age, silence is consent, and we have to stop being silent, and we have to start being loud and obnoxious, and we have to start using our voice, and we have to start doing the things that we say are hard in order to ensure that we maintain the government's recognition that we hold the power, not the government.
Yeah. Do you think that we should redefine patriotism as active participation in democratic life?
Yes. Um, yes. Like I said, if I mentioned it earlier. It should be one of those things where you're embarrassed if you don't go vote. Well, you should be. It should be pushed out. And I hate to say this, but we should propagandize the living daylights out of elections. And what I mean by that is we should make it so that instead of Uncle Sam saying, "Hey, I need you to join the military. I need you to go vote. I need you to go do your civic duty. I need you to participate because you have the power to change things." So yes, it is patriotic to vote. It doesn't matter how you vote. I mean, you can vote for whoever you want. I may not agree with you, but that's your decision, right? And throughout history, our history, we've gone through different hiccups. Um, when we first started voting, it was all voice vote, and it was easy to do voice vote because, again, like you said, it was landowning white men. Um, but as we progressed, the next step became, um, the parties would print their ballot in the party newspaper, and it would be the color of the party, and you would rip that thing out of the newspaper, and you would put your vote down on that ballot, and you would walk to the ballot box. Well, there were instances where you were in a state or in a location that was predominantly one party over another, and there were examples of people who got shot because they were trying to go to the polling place and they were carrying the wrong color ballot. Matter of fact, there was one instance where um, the shooters were charged initially, and the judge came out and said, "Well, that's part of your civic duty. Like, if you're not willing to risk life and limb, then you shouldn't be voting." Um,
Wow.
which is insane to me, but that was in our American history. Um, but fast forward to today, we use the Australian system, and we use the Australian system because um, it's a manner that allows us to vote in keep our employers, keep our landlords, keep those individuals like the sheriff from seeing how we were voting, because there was a time where they would stand there and watch, and if you voted in a way that they didn't like, you either went to jail, you lost your job, or you lost your home. And so the Australian voting system came around. There were drawbacks. Australian voting system in the north was widely praised because it allowed people to vote without their employers knowing how they were voting. In the south, it was widely praised because it served as a literacy test, because you weren't able to take someone with you to help you understand what the ballot was saying. And so it had its problems too. But today we still use the Australian voting system. We've adjusted it from time to time. But long-winded answer is, you know, I lost my point. But the fact of the matter is that we vote the way that we vote because it's important to us. And so I don't care if you vote for the wrong person. I don't want to know if you vote for the wrong person. Um, uh, if you tell me, I'll tell you that I think that you voted for the wrong person. But at the end of the day, just use your voice, man. Like, get out there and be heard. And if you don't think you're being heard, then you're not being loud enough.
Yeah. Yeah. How did your military experience kind of shape your views just on things like information and transparency?
15 years ago, I would have been MAGA. Um, and that's God's honest truth. Um, I'm still a registered Republican, even though I don't align with a lot of the Republican views. Um, but my time in the Marine Corps has taught me the importance of civic engagement. When I see someone out and they're burning the flag, it drives me bonkers. But I'll willingly walk up to that person, shake their hand, and thank them for exercising the right that I served to protect. Um, when someone that says something that I don't agree with, I'll get into a colorful debate with them. I have no problem getting into a colorful debate with them, but I am happy that we're able to debate the way that we debate. Um, However, as an intel Marine, and I think this might be the core of your question, I also understand that information is privileged. And there are some things that the general population doesn't need to know. Um, because it's going to hurt us in the long run if we make it public, because our enemies are watching us too. And they're engaged too. So I would say that, you know, the publicly available information, like how our Congress people vote, how or what bills our Congress members or our representatives are putting on the floor, what our city council is saying at every single meeting, those things are not privileged. And those things must be made available to the population. But operational details, classified information, all that stuff, that's okay as long as we have oversight of that information at some level, right?
Right.
And that's why we elect our representatives, because they're the ones that actually have that oversight. Now, do I think that the closed door conversations that our representatives had that resulted in the 8 Democrats capitulating on the shutdown. Do I think that should have happened behind closed doors? Absolutely not. I think that should have happened on the floor, and I
Yeah,
think that it should have happened publicly so that everyone could see. But beyond that, I would say that my military career has taught me that there's nuances,
yeah,
and I
absolutely.
understand that.
Absolutely. So I want to use the time that we have left to kind of talk about your project, Crayon Box Politics.
Mhm.
What inspired you to found this?
Um, it started out as a podcast, and like I said, I've had the desire to get into politics myself and become a politician myself. And I figured that the best way to get my voice and get my name recognition out there was to um, was to have that podcast and actually talk about the issues. But as I progressed, I discovered, hey, there's so much other things that I could do with this, and this project could expound beyond what it is. And so that's kind of how we got to where I created the LLC, and we created Crayon Box Politics as a media and civic technology organization. Um, the name came from my time as a Marine. Uh, when I was a recruiter, the Air Force decided that they wanted to call Marines crayon eaters because we just
Hmm.
weren't smart. And it backfired on them because the Marine Corps like truly embraced that nickname, and I embraced it too and said, you know what, let's take that moniker and let's utilize that because it also has validity in American politics. And what I mean by that is that, we spent the evening talking about Democrats and Republicans, and which factors into red and blue. But the reality is that America is not red and blue. We're red, we're blue, we're green, we're purple, we're yellow, we're orange,
Right.
it depending on the political spectrum and where we fall out. Like it is a box of crayons. And so what we have to do is we have to understand that, like you said in the opening, we're not as polarized as we think we are. We're not as different as we think we are. And so that's where the name comes from. And then the final slogan of coloring outside the lines. Well, our party, the party system, has written and drawn lines for us.
Absolutely.
And we have to color outside those lines in order to actually truly be effective as the true political power, which is with the people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to mention your website, crayonboxpolitics.com. And what can people find on your website when they go there?
So right now on the website, you can find our podcast, you can find our blog, and the blog is predominantly written by me, but we are in the process of opening that up to some guest authors. Matter of fact, we had our first guest author. God, I can't pronounce that stuff right now. Who wrote an absolutely beautiful blog post about the differences between the way that America handles the lack of a budget and the way that Britain handles the lack of a budget. Britain being that if their parliament can't get a budget, then it triggers a national election, and every one of those people that failed to do their jobs is out of a job at the end of the day. Whereas America just shuts down the entire government.
Right.
So a beautiful piece, and we're in the process of opening that up to everyone so that we can embrace that media aspect of the media and civic tech company.
And how does your your podcast was Crayon Box Weekly, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. How does that kind of approach civic engagement differently from, say, the mainstream media?
So we have spent the last year kind of getting our feet under us. We started out kind of watching the Senate and the House and reporting on the Senate and the House every week, which got to a point where we were actually saying, "Hey, they've done nothing. Surprise, surprise."
Yeah.
So we didn't really have anything to talk about. So what we did is instead we took a deep dive approach, look at how our government works and why our government works the way that it works. We started out with um, voter engagement. We're talking about states' rights. We're talking about states' rights this month. Next month, we're going to take a break just because of the holidays, and then we're going to roll into next season discussing the differences, or not the differences, but discussing our findings as we develop these politician baseball cards. So we're actually going to poll 1 or 2 politicians a week, and we're going to kind of talk about, hey, you know, this person versus this person. And we're also bringing back that current event style look at the scenarios. So like I said, this past Monday was an experiment into talking through the current events. But next season, we're going to add that. We're going to bring that back into it with that understanding of a little bit of funny, a little bit of serious, to try to keep things chipper and keep people engaged.
Well, Carl, I wish you the best of luck with all of your projects. I'll definitely be keeping track of them. Very fascinated by what you're doing, especially the archivist. I think that's going to be a fantastic project. If you know, I say if just because I know the challenges with the APIs and the cost and everything like that, and it does seem like a daunting task. And I want to thank you for joining the program. And to everyone out there listening, you can go to Crayon Box Politics. Let's put that back up on the screen real quick. crayonboxpolitics.com. And I assume that people can reach you via your website as well, Carl?
Yep, there's a contact form on the website, but you can also reach us at contact@crayonboxpolitics.com. And I'm willing to hear from anyone. Like, let me know what you think about the project. Let me know how you think that we can improve, because again, the power is with the people, and I want to make sure that this tool, this process, and this project is something that is going to be used by the people.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for joining the program. I had a fascinating conversation, learned quite a bit. And for everyone else out there, we will see you next week.
All right. Thank you.